Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Kenneth Ro. He's an emergency physician, and today's Kevin MD article is From Survival to Sovereignty, What 35 Years in the ER Taught Me About Identity, Mortality, and Redemption. Kenneth, welcome to the show.
Hey, pleasure to be here, Kevin.
All right, so thank you so much for writing on Kevin MD. So you're an emergency physician. Tell me about the events that led you to write this article on Kevin MD in the first place.
Well, it's pretty much an autobiography, and I did a lot of reflection. I've been doing a lot of reflection for the past maybe 7 to 8 years. And I think COVID really kind of accelerated that process because, we were not seeing many patients in the ER. There was a lot of time to read. It was kind of a, hectic, scary time, particularly for us in the ER, wearing all that personal protective gear for 12 hours. And, it was crazy times. But, the story starts, of course, with how I grew up. My dad had the option when he was a political science professor, and he had the option to either go to Fargo, North Dakota, or College Station, Texas. And he actually grew up in North Korea. He hated the cold. And he said, no way am I going to go to Fargo. Mm-hmm. So I'm coming to Texas. So we ended up at Texas A&M. I was the only Asian, we were the only Asian family in Central Texas in the whole city, which in first grade in elementary school was actually an advantage. I was the only one. I wasn't singled out for bullying or pain. I was actually very honored for being different. And so I kind of took that as a kid. That really imprinted in my mind. It's like, well, yeah, this is the way it's going to go in the world as I get older. My differences and my individuality and my uniqueness is going to be an advantage. And that all slapped me in the face when we moved when I was in fifth grade, just like in the middle of the year, kind of suddenly. We didn't expect it. They kind of changed the school district. So I ended up in a different school. And, they say there's safety in numbers. And my number was 1. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't too much safety there. I got introduced to bullying in a huge way. And I was shocked. I mean, it really, some of the excerpts in the story, I got thrown into a dumpster while I was waiting for the bus and locked in. And I had graffiti spray painted on my car and all the usual racial slurs that, that an Asian had to endure at that time. And, I really felt ostracized and rejected and, a lot of shame. But I really didn't know until I got older what all that really meant. I kind of told myself that this too shall pass. Once I get into college, things will be different. Mm-hmm. And but looking back upon it, what I built was this attitude that, if it's going to be this way, academics is my only way out. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to flat out work harder than anybody else. I have to work harder than anyone else because I'm not going to get cut any slack anywhere. And so I took that kind of perfectionist performance attitude into the rest of my life until I was almost in my mid 50s. And it served me well on one hand, as far as what was defined as success for me, ER doctor, adrenaline junkie. But I finally realized something was missing after I had a couple of injuries. I had a couple of surgeries back in 2015 or so. And I was on the shelf for like 3 months. So, I gained 25 pounds. I didn't do anything. I couldn't do anything. And then then I just, that angry portion of me that had been kind of my shame armor kind of lashed out at my wife, at other people. And I would really look at myself in the mirror and I'd say, I don't like who I am. Mm-hmm. But I did. One of the seminal moments in my life is I read Dr. Gundry's The Plant Paradox back in 2017. And it literally changed my life. I learned that my vegan diet was actually working against me because I was eating a whole bunch of lectins. Mm-hmm. And once I got on his plan, I mean, the results were astounding. I lost 20 pounds. I got my energy back. And then I started becoming kinder and nicer and more present. And so that was a big epiphany in my life, saying, well, hey, guess what? You take care of your physical, then the mental gets better and you become a better person. I started looking into spirituality and self compassion. I started reading Brene Brown, learning about shame and learning about what I'd built up over the years that really wasn't working for me anymore. And about the same time, I had the same epiphany because I'm sitting in the ER working full time shifts and I'm seeing my patients come in, and it seems like everybody's getting more and more frail
Yeah.
and weaker. And, you're starting to see hip fractures in 60-year-old women. And I'm thinking, I'm a doc, I'm an ER doc. I have very limited amounts of, preventive medicine. It's all consequence medicine for me. And, have I been part of the problem rather than part of the solution? Have I just been a band-aid? And so that really led me to a lot of deep thinking. And I just said, something, I've spent so much time studying what causes diseases, studying what causes the body to go wrong. I really haven't studied enough of what the body does right. I mean, the body does so many right things. And so at that time, I took a real deep dive into all things precision medicine, biohacking, individual medicine. And I really felt it was my calling to try to help people in that way, really
Mm-hmm.
start going into healthcare rather than sick care. And so, of course, I'm an ER doctor. I'm very comfortable in my role. And then COVID hit. And so I really wanted to start a virtual practice for men, but really for everybody eventually, but for men to kind of optimize their health, kind of
Mm-hmm.
the same pathway that I took, because I did a lot of individual testing, tested for allergies, food testing, SIBO, inflammation, found out I was high on all
Mm-hmm.
accounts. And then once I adjusted that, everything else fell into place. And, it was a great positive upward spiral for health. And I just said, hey, this is my calling. I'm a healer. I want to be a healthcare. I want to be a guide to other people to help them achieve health and vitality, help them feel good. And, once they feel good, they're going to be better people and do good. So that's kind of been my mantra for the
Mm-hmm.
past several years. But this year, everything is coming to fruition. I have been reading and following your podcast for years, and I just said, wow, I get so much, such good information. For some reason, the past few months have just really spoke to me. I mean, you had the two Korean physicians
Mm-hmm.
on several months ago, and I was just like, wow, these guys have stories that are very similar to mine. I mean, every story resonates with me in such a huge, deep way. So I just said, something, maybe it's time that I just start putting this together. So I finally started putting together all I got the consults, started putting together practice, and, we're hoping to actually start seeing patients on August the 1st. So
Oh.
very, very exciting time. And then I also spun off a couple of things just from my, feeling better, doing better attitude and my philosophy. And that was the Nova Oath, the kind of the modern Hippocratic Oath that you published
Yeah.
as well. And also there's a movement that I've coined, So Go Make a Difference.
Sure.
Basically, that's going to be just pay it forward, but it's also going to include an anti-bullying program for the kids and school children, also for the parents. So that came out of a conversation with my mother right before I went to medical school, because I was in College Station. I went to Texas A&M. I was kind of skittish about going out of town, but I got into med school in Houston, and I was really scared there then that, hey, I'm still badly scarred from all this bullying, and now I'm going to go to the big city,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be worse. And my mom just said, yeah, you're different. So now go make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuck with me forever. My mom, all of a sudden, she's so soft, and she just said, now go out there, you know, and go get them. And so I was just like, yeah, okay, let's start making a difference. So, that's kind of the crux of what I'm doing right
Sure.
now. And, that was kind of what led to sending in the article.
So In your article, you talk about compartmentalizing some of this unprocessed trauma that you just described to us. Now, how did you go about doing that? Because it's clearly influenced you throughout your life, certainly up until today. How did you go about processing some of that trauma that you experienced as a child?
Well, I think the first part of processing it was to just sweep it under the rug and kind of internalize it.
Hmm.
It's like I mentioned that the body always keeps the score. I mean, I think compared to most physicians, I've probably seen the time of death more than most physicians.
Yeah.
ER doctor, you do the codes on the floor, you pronounce the DNR patient. So, I've seen that last agonal breath and the bradycardia to the asystole like more times than most, and more times than I probably had expected when I started my career. But I would reflect on that and say, you've seen the time of death. The one thing, Kevin, that was so surprising is that every time it finally happened, that death came and I pronounced the time, the patient looked so peaceful.
Hmm.
I mean, I was just floored by that. But you would think I could use that information, in some sort of constructive way. Yeah, you would think I'd be very, more fate or stoic or, really memento mori, that sort of remembering death and looking at life from death's point of view. But no, I just compartmentalized that as well and just kind of just moved on. And over time, it became more. I just kind of questioned myself because I was like, "Am I becoming more of a machine to
Hmm.
this rather than a human being?" And I would say, well, you can't just cry your eyeballs out right in front of the patient's family. You have to be, the voice of calm, the voice of reason, and you have to maintain that. But I guess over the years, all those times and everything that I saw in the ER from AIDS to COVID and everything in between, it definitely affected me personally because I really didn't look at it in an introspective way. And I probably didn't, well, I know that I didn't process it in a healthy, constructive way. I would process it in my shame shield.
Yeah.
And instead of growing from it and learning from it, it would just make my shield armor harder and bigger. So that's the way I look at it until maybe about 3 or 4 years ago when I started processing things a lot more efficiently and kind of understanding that, hey, this sideways emotion really has a central theme of everything that you've really tried to compartmentalize and keep in rather than share it with someone else and allow the power of conversation with people in your inner circle and people who love you, allow that to for you to have compassion from other people, allow that to come in. So that was the big change.
So it sounds like you carry this trauma, this baggage for decades, right? And you said it wasn't until like 3 to 4 years ago when you were injured and you didn't like who you saw in a mirror where you had that epiphany, that realization, and that self-compassion to inspire you to process that trauma. Did you have any help during this journey? Did you just read books, or did you have counselor, therapist, anyone who help you along that journey? Because after so many decades of compartmentalization, I could only imagine how difficult it is to come out of that.
I had all the above. I had a fantastic therapist who he actually knew Brene Brown.
Hmm.
So the therapist, and then I started reading Kristen Neff, Self
Hmm.
Compassion, and I went to one of her conferences, retreats. I got to know her personally as well.
Sure.
And coincidentally, one of her intake tests, I scored so low on self compassion. It was horrendous.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, you really have to take a look at this because you're not being kind to yourself at all. And that was showing up in other ways. But yeah, definitely trying to white knuckle this wasn't
Sure.
wasn't the way to go. I mean, I got a lot of help, and I'm very grateful that I took those steps. But my therapist, I'll mention his name, Phil Ginsburg, just an amazing person, amazing man. He's just helped me so much, and I've had a lot of people help me throughout my life. And as I become more aware and I start processing my trauma better, I start realizing that, you know something, it wasn't those guys that bullied you in school. You've had so much help in your life from all your professors, from your fellow doctors, colleagues, and all your patients. So you've had a lot of love that you've pretty much foreboded
Hmm.
to rather settle into your more comfortable emotional state of, protecting yourself and survival mode. So that was kind of the gist of that part of my article.
If if all the physicians took that intake form from Chris and Neff, I bet you that so many of them would score low in
Yeah,
self-compassion.
yeah.
And I talked to a lot of physicians on this podcast, and a lot of them have to deal with unprocessed trauma and compartmentalized just as you did. Tell us some pieces of advice that you could share with these physicians who may be in a similar situation to where you once were. How can they begin to move forward?
I think it comes with the self-realization that and the self-awareness that what you do is tough. You
Hmm.
know, I think what happens is over the years we kind of dismiss all the hard hours, all the sweat equity, all the studying, all the night shifts, and that leads to one of the biggest blocks to me was actually imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
I think that just created more shame. And, I just said, one of these days somebody is going to find out that I'm not as smart as my record reflects. And I think a lot of physicians have that, and that kind of ties into shame as well. But one thing that turned me around was Adam Grant's book, Think Again,
Hmm.
The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, which, of course, that sort of knowledge is just so important, knowing your blind spots or having somebody counsel your blind spots. But his spin on imposter syndrome completely changed my mind. It just completely changed my life because I was struggling so much with it. Where he stated in his book was that imposter syndrome is actually a sign of humility,
Hmm.
because if you're not really having self-doubt, then you don't have any opportunity to improve or for self-introspection. Essentially, if you don't feel like you have imposter syndrome, you're more on the narcissistic scale. You're just like, yeah, everybody should have a little bit of it, and that's healthy. And when he put it in that framework, I was just like, wow, that really, because I was really struggling with that. Imposter syndrome's not a bad thing. Actually, it can be a productive thing. So when I read that, that really changed a lot of outlooks, and
Hmm.
it changed a lot of my shame. I would counsel or recommend for any doc that's going through it. First of all, give yourself a lot. Be very gentle with yourself. Give yourself a lot of kudos. I want to give all the physicians a lot of kudos, and that what we do is hard.
Hmm.
This is not easy work. We could have chosen to be in a lot of different fields, probably made a lot more money, and also had a lot more headaches. But we chose to take care of patients. And in this era of micromanagement and actuarials and numbers needed to treat, we're kind of losing focus of that patient physician connection. I call it more of a connection than a relationship, because, we sit in front of that person that really trusts us and needs us in that moment. So,
Hmm.
you know, really, really be gentle with yourself. Right. Kind of one of the exercises that Kristen does is she'll say, pretend that you're receiving a letter from your best friend. What would the language be in that letter, as opposed to a letter that you'd write yourself? That would be full of self-deprecation and full of criticism that you wouldn't accept hearing from anybody else. But coming from yourself,
Hmm.
you know, that's just how you live 24/7. So, but first thing, just a lot of compassion and empathy. What we do is hard, what we do is impactful, and what we do is important. So, but yeah, definitely take that first step with maybe taking that test,
Hmm.
and think about getting. There's a lot of physician counselors that are out there. Usually, whatever medical consortium you work for or work with We'll have resources for you because the other physician counselors, man, it's almost like I got in the wrong business. These
Mhm.
guys make $500 an hour or something. I'm like, well, I don't know.
We're talking to Kenneth Ro, emergency physician. Today's Kevin MD article is From Survival to Sovereignty: What 35 Years in the ER Taught Me About Identity, Mortality, and Redemption. Kenneth, let's end with some take-home messages they want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Well, what I really wanted to reinforce was that be very gentle with yourself. I mean, we talk about burnout like we wear it like a badge of honor. It's not a badge of honor. And I would really encourage everyone to just kind of look at both your patients and yourselves with the type of lens that really looks deeply into their souls and looks deeply into your souls. I mean, we're all here to try to make the world a better, kinder, nicer place, and talk things out with the people who really love you. I do want to leave one recommendation. This is from my friend Amit Sood. He was with the Mayo Clinic. Now he's kind of independent. But one thing that tends to suffer with us physicians is our relationships. So he has
Mhm.
this 2-minute rule, which I think is just amazing. When you get off of work, you greet your spouse, significant other, your partner, and just either look at them or hug them or just be with them for 2 full minutes, eye to eye. It just makes such a difference in your life. Honor them, and you'll be in a much better place because of it.
Kenneth, thank you so much for sharing your story, time, and insight, and thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Ken.